The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall continue to follow me all the days of this death, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Traveling the underworld. What's up, Joe Moore? Shout out to Five in the house right off the bat. Love to see that. Appreciate you folks. This is the Cutting Edge. Please, please congratulate yourselves. And yes, I understand that I sound sarcastic. Replay crew, you as well. Few people have the courage and the guts and the intestinal fortitude to be on the cutting edge and to consider and resonate with ideas before they enter the zeitgeist or the lexicon. And now, before I go into that, I do want to give yourselves a round of applause. I do, in my own life, I found it important to always make sure to recognize my own accomplishments, especially if people are still prone to beating themselves up at times, right? Negative self-talk. At the risk of telling folks what to do, I do find this important. And now I see in live chats of other live streams or other live streamers in the so-called truth community, I see ideas that, Benton was espousing 3, 4, 5 or more years ago, just passed off as, as if that's their nugget of wisdom, which is fine. Benton doesn't need it attached to him. But many of these are folks who no longer fuck with yours truly, which is fine. People go their separate ways. And that's the only point I'm making is not to, it's not wounded Benton or to martyr Benton. The point is, there should be some acknowledgement of the folks who are there for the ideas when they're still ahead of the curve, because that's when it takes courage to entertain the ideas, to consider the ideas, to ponder on the ideas, instead of rejecting the ideas. Well, and yeah, those folks, they also, that applied to them at the time. So, but either way, it's still appropriate, it's still apropos of something. And in the thumbnail, those are the Jehovah's Witnesses. When I go to Whole Foods downtown, past a certain hour in the morning, they are around. It's funny, I guess maybe some out-of-town Jehovah's Witnesses were there. There was like a big gaggle of them outside the Whole Foods. And, having experience growing up in that cult that I was never a member of, let's be clear, I did not join. They have this way of doing their own thing in the physical realm when they have, when they're like 2 or 3 of them, they're quite humble and deferential. But as the numbers grow, 8 people, 9 people, 10 people, they sort of take over and dominate the space. And, at a certain point, they're blocking the sidewalk very nearly. It's interesting to see those dynamics because they are better than you. Because remember, they are morally superior, right? In their own minds. Fascinating dynamics. We have some notes. Aaron Imholt from the Steel Toe Morning Show. This is the day he's most likely finally going to be sentenced to jail. Although I suspect that some deal will be worked out where maybe he only goes on the weekends, something like that. Depending on how much time they give him, I think he's going to get like a year. So at that point, he'll probably have to do it all in a row. But I won't even go into what he's done. But this does show how the legal system works with respect to fighting legal battles as intensely as possible from the first moment. Because if anybody's ever heard of this Nick Rekieta fellow, who was actually involved in much more serious crimes, including just much more serious crimes involving like simultaneous possession of drugs and firearms. Well, he has money and hired lawyers and fought from day one. Now, he did submit to he was allowed himself to be interrogated. That was not a great idea. He's even been able to successfully fight the release of the body cam footage of the police raiding his home, that's quite difficult to accomplish, depending on the state. They say, well, what about this, public record and the right of the people to know and transparency? Yeah, the state's going to do whatever it wants. And please don't let me forget, actually, let's make a note. There's some truck driving announcements. I don't know that anything will change, but at least the system is pretending to address some of these issues around safety with big rigs. Although my opinion is it's all having to do with the transition to self-driving trucks. Eventually it's just all going to be lumped into, look at these humans that keep crashing into things and endangering the public. At a certain point, people will just say, well, the big rig, the self-driving truck, how could it do any worse? But one moment, truck driving. Truck. And I do have some spiritual topics as I continue to work on my enunciation and diction. So yeah, that's all happening. Peace and respect, Joe Moore in chat. And what's up, Mark Rizzo? Good day to you, sir. Greetings and salutations from the back seat of a Nissan Versa parked on the streets of Los Angeles. Oh, that's the first order of business. Yesterday, hanging out in the car, waiting for bedtime, debating on whether or not to go for a walk, so that I'm less, stiff and whatever in the morning, right? From laying around the car in the afternoon, and a car alarm starts going off in the vicinity, and that's not that unusual. It happens, but it persists. So eventually, it's not going to stop. So I get out of the car to see what's happening, and it's a Tesla parked directly behind me, flashing lights. Alarm is flashing, and you can't see through the windshield. I can tell there's somebody in the driver's seat, but the windshield is tinted so dark, can't quite see what's going on in there. But apparently a drug user, a drug addict, has a pile of trash on the sidewalk and is, I don't know what he's doing, but it seems, based on later observation, that he had taken the trash bag out of a nearby trash can and, for whatever reason, emptied it onto the sidewalk. And then at a certain point, he was pulling on the door handle of the car, but not being let in as the alarm continued to go off. But like I said, there's somebody in the driver's seat, so not knowing what's happening, but ultimately only caring that the racket stopped. And then at a certain point, the addict was putting the trash into the trash bag, and then eventually got into the back seat of the Tesla with the trash bag. Of course, he left some of the refuse behind on the sidewalk. And I don't like having litter near my car because, people will begin to associate that with me. So I cleaned up what was left of it this morning. And it was so disgusting, I have to say. What was left behind was so disgusting that I immediately went and washed my hands for the second time. I had just washed my hands. That's how you know it's bad. It's like, oh, this is terrible. What a nightmare. And at a certain point, is it called echolalia or whatever? Part of my undiagnosed fake autism. At a certain point, to cope with the alarm going off, plus maybe to make it more likely that, because they're intentionally setting this off, whoever's in the car is intentionally, it's almost like they're drawing as much attention to the area as possible. These bizarre things happen. Again, back to the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, the waking dream waking dream surrealistic unreality. Certainly elements of that, like what is happening. But then, perhaps the driver is, engaged in some sort of drug frenzy, some fear and loathing in Las Vegas-esque drug frenzy. And perhaps he's picked up a sex worker slash drug buddy just randomly on the streets, who's now, for whatever reason, insisting upon, well, we need to stop over there so I can, so they can, scatter trash everywhere. And then I understand the middle America folks where they live, were this to occur, yes, the police will show up, cuffing stuff, probably the driver's getting a DUI, car impounded. Yes, I understand all of that. What does that cost the city, the county, and the state is the question. What these cities have realized at a certain point is that the amount of money it costs, they would rather spend that on pensions and salaries for, say, city workers, right? So the people that, work in these parks, and that is a nepotism, right? You have to know somebody to get those jobs. That's why they're so sought after. And then they retire, if they stay long enough, they retire with a pretty big pension and all of these things. And again, Americans are against that. And I think it's important to realize that, if you look at America collectively, folks are against that. They don't want necessarily their neighbors, somebody to start working for the city at age 20, retire at age 40, and then maybe work another 20 years or 15 years and retire with 2 pensions. And then now they're living next door to you, and their teenage kids are running around tearing up the local area and being hellions because this person has, $10,000 a month coming in. And then learning to game the disability system at a certain point. Law enforcement claiming PTSD, getting disability, but then still free to go work somewhere, right? All of these things that happen. And again, I'm not in favor of this necessarily. What I'm saying is, at least it's a human being and not a bank or a corporation getting free money for nothing through so-called crony capitalism. Meanwhile, the corporation and the bank don't live next door to you, right? If the bank and the corporation had to live amongst us, imagine if just weather and environment weren't really a thing, and Amazon and billionaires and the executives, there was no walls, there was no buildings, everybody was just kind of in a space together. I'm convinced that if these activities had to occur like near just regular humans, it wouldn't be tolerated either. What the corporations and the banks are able to do in conjunction with the government. It's the fact that it's out of sight, out of mind. And then we're only, the people are only really ever reminded of it through the media versus the person that lives next door who may be on food stamps, Section 8, or, somebody who, got disability from a job or just whatever that may be. Most folks are against that. So yeah, maybe in a vacuum, it would be great if there was somebody that could show up and just take these people away from me, right? If I could push a button, it was like, okay, this Tesla and these 2 people just disappear and I don't have to think about what's happened to them. Sure. But the reality of throwing them into the LA County jail, rough and tumble style, and then it's already overcrowded, and then what's that going to cost? And, probably at least one of the 2 has enough money to hire a lawyer and fight the charges through the court system. Like, this is big money, man. We've got a city to run here. Who's going to pay for that? And you can blame it on LA and California. All big cities are like this. They say, oh, well, it's those blue cities. All cities are blue cities. What are you talking about? With only a few exceptions, there's no such thing as a red city, folks. They're all blue. even in the red states. What do you think Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Texas, and Austin, Texas, and San Antonio are? Yeah, Fort Worth might be red. It's only a piece of it's 9 million people in DFW, and it's Fort Smith. Fort Worth ain't that much of it. And what I'm doing here is I'm thinking my way through a problem instead of just looking at one aspect and knee-jerk reacting to it. And that's why, as the cutting edge of these ideas, especially spiritually, this ain't for everybody. Most folks, are just simply unable to cope with at least pondering on this. And yeah, there's counterpoints, and I prefer that people think for themselves anyway, right? Don't take my word for it. I would rather people pushed back in an appropriate manner. Why should my ideas carry the day? Just, at a default level. That ain't cool. Never mind. So yeah, that happened. And then, with the echolalia or whatever, eventually I started, loudly mimicking the horn honking. And eventually I think that helped them realize that, could you pretty please with sugar on top, knock it the fuck off. And certainly approaching them and trying to be forceful. On some level, that's probably what they want. And then with the stream title tied up with humiliation in a way, some of these folks want to be publicly humiliated, lest we forget. I've been attacked by homeless people where I could tell, oh, they're used to getting their ass kicked. They want me to kick. On some level, they want it to get their ass kicked. It's like, no, man, that's fucking creepy and weird. And that's some of what was this idea of this new One Battle After Another film as propaganda based on a Thomas Pynchon novel. It made me think of, and then some of the articles promoting it as, first it's like this groundbreaking, award season darling or whatever, but then, I noted very quickly, well, it seems to be perfectly matching what's going on in the zeitgeist culturally, with the news and Charlie Kirk and all of this, and people thinking there's going to be a revolution. Anyway, let's not even get into that. But just a moment, let's rinse the mouth out a little bit, and then starting to see articles just basically plainly stating that, on some level, just implying as strongly as possible the levels of propaganda. And it is a way to vent the frustrations, to have some sort of outlet for the frustrations that build up in society. But what was my larger point? I had a larger point. Oh, well, there was this Paul Thomas Anderson, who made this movie I'm referring to, also made Inherent Vice, which was also based on it was a closer adaptation to a Thomas Pynchon novel. And so what was mentioned was the idea that this Sean Penn character, who's, Lockjaw, Colonel Lockjaw. So he's a villain, right? Because remember, Lockjaw is a Bond villain. So it's just like, make sure everybody knows he's a villain. And it's treated as this is his sexual fetish, is to wield power and, over the powerless, right? Who typically would be portrayed as anybody but a white person, right? Or even just a regular old urban black person, which, increasingly is just kind of the same thing as far as the system is concerned. Whatever that says, it's kind of the same thing from the perspective of the system. But, if either way, I don't even want to get into the racial stuff right now. But so in Inherent Vice, it was Josh Brolin's character, who was the police officer who was always hassling Joaquin Phoenix, and he's trying to goad Joaquin Phoenix into like a physical fight because that's what arouses Josh Brolin. And so near the end of the movie, Brolin actually just over the top, like, kicks the door off the hinges to Joaquin Phoenix's apartment, and just like comes through the door like in his his undershirt and his boxers and his black socks or whatever. Just, like, hey, give me what I want. Kick my ass, beat me up, and I'm gonna like it, right? And it's creepy, man. It's weird. So, um, I think a lot of the Middle America folks just assume, well, they know how they would deal with that. It's like, I don't know, man. What if you detected that these creepy weirdos, this is kind of what they want you to do, is to come over here and give them what for, So eventually they knocked it off. It started up again briefly. And then, in the drug frenzy paranoia of, hey, there's a car in front of us with Arkansas plates and, it's got the windows covered. They probably just wanted to know what the fuck was going on inside the car. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day. And so I showed myself long enough that they were probably satisfied again in their drug-fueled frenzy. Whatever. And then, it briefly started up. And it's interesting, some of these people, the drugs make them so hyper aware of the environment. As I was reaching into the back of the hatchback to get my blankets ready to lie down, it started up again, like immediately. And then I'm thinking, is this going to be all night? I'm going to try to sleep with this with this happening. Then they left, thankfully. So yeah, that happened. Not a big deal. Not a big deal overall. It just comes with the territory. And then you never know when somebody that, lives in this area, pays a lot of money for an apartment, and maybe they get sick of looking at my car and me, and, don't generally preach on Jesus in this area, but there was I get a little loud over here at times. And then just the morning sermons, right? The morning live stream and whatever that does energetically. And then, clearly the energies of the people are on the rise. That's what I'm observing. I'm observing more, arguments and more contention and more disputes and confrontations. It's actually pretty laid back and chill for the most part around these parts. And then how much of that is the contagious, and the nature of what I do on these streams, and then topically and energetically and spiritually, how much of that is tied into, the demons getting stirred up, right? Just the daily recitation of Psalm 23. Psalm 23 would do the trick, I expect. So 2 different times now, drug addicts have approached me at my car. And one of them did it appropriately, where we ended up having a conversation. And unfortunately, looking back on it, I think we talked for over an hour, and I think that it wasn't the cause of me getting drunk. And I do want to get into still feeling some of the effects of the one time getting drunk, right? And recently. And I think that's 3 total times since I stopped drinking initially. And again, never promised I don't even believe in sobriety. I think that's sobriety as a concept is more harm than good in my world. It's like there's, and I've had this idea, and I don't know that I came up with it, but now I see it more and more in the YouTube comments. It's like, people talk about it's over, it's a wrap. And at a certain point I realized, well, how can it ever end if it doesn't have a beginning, whatever's being referred to, if it's always been the way that it is. And so the thing about sobriety is there can't be a relapse if there's no sobriety. Like, sobriety creates the relapse. It's like, no, I got drunk. I didn't relapse. What are you talking about? It's not a relapse. It's a bozo human that doesn't really drink anymore. There's a reason why that really is there. And got drunk like a bozo. So now 96 hours in, I'm a little sick, right? Which just a little bit of chest congestion, and it'll be fine. It'll clear up. My head's pounding, but that's not from the alcohol. That's from some strong herbal tea mostly, and the colon, or the large intestine, being active in the morning time, and doing its job, certainly. Shout out to the Benton's large intestine. You're the best large intestine in the world. Part of healing my gallbladder, and maybe my pancreas to some extent, although my assumption was that my pancreas was fucked. So But yeah, part of the gallbladder was I used to say, I love you, gallbladder. You're the best gallbladder in the world, to help facilitate the healing. Because the liver bounced back quite quickly, as they typically do. Funny how that works. And of course, medical coding and billing, if I went to the doctors, they would immediately have removed my gallbladder. But it's like, yo, I need a gallbladder. It's there for a reason. Let's go ahead and keep it. Oh, but you have gallstones. Yeah, and now I don't. So yeah, I had gallstones, and now I don't. And I have a gallbladder. So is gallstones a good enough reason to remove one's gallbladder? Well, the doctor will say, well, yeah, if the person's not going to change their lifestyle and their diet and facilitate the body's own healing process, then yeah, go ahead and remove it. And the corporation makes a profit. But doc, I'm able to change my lifestyle, and surely I can figure out what substances will help my body, what foods and substances will help rectify this over time. And the doc is like, yeah, but how am I going to get paid? Well, that's your problem, doc. The corporation employs you to figure that out, buddy. Ma'am. And then, as a tangent, me listening to so many of these interrogation videos, when it's a young black fella and they're in there with a male interrogator, they like to mumble because it's a culture of no snitching. So even as they're in there telling, they're mumbling and trying to low talk as if that's going to make any difference whatsoever. And they've so been raised, and it's not just, look, it's not because they're black, right? It's white people are this way too, raised without fathers or raised without strong fathers, that when they're trying to be and it's especially from the South, they've been taught to be polite and respectful. So they're answering the detective with, they go, yeah, mom. Yes, mom. They're actually saying yes, ma'am, because they're so used to female authority figures. Right. They so rarely say yes, sir, that they're unable to say yes. Now somebody say, oh well, it's ridicule. It's like, no, you can tell this is a well-worn pattern. So just things I think about that never quite make the broadcast. Thank y'all for liking the stream. It's the least I could do. What do we got here? Yeah, so the first drug addict showed up, and his pretense was wanting to know homeless information, like where to take a shower, and this idea that he's soon to be homeless. But the reality is, as a Jewish man from New York City, get a rope. And I don't mean the Jewish part. That was a TV commercial having to do with New York City. Watch yourself, Benton. Don't want to get the car firebombed. But ha ha ha, them's jokes. We're not manifesting over here. But well, we are, but we're not manifesting that. And realizing that he was all ate up with these demons of addiction, and you could see the demonic oppression on him. But then, how much of that was me saying, demons, do your worst? And then, I can't blame that demonic influence, but if you combine that with hanging out with people who drink every day and go into withdrawals, so much so that the one guy, he was being pleasant and talking to me, but you could tell he was hurting. So I went and took him and got him a couple of beers. I've been there, although not without the ability to get the beer, but I know what that feels like. And I think some people just sort of own their own. In his mind, he's probably like, why should I be, why should I go bother the public when I'm the one who has to have a drink? Which I respect that on some level. And he knows at some point somebody's going to give him a beer. It just might be a few more hours of suffering, right? That's how that works. And so why must Benton suffer for this drunk? Because 96 hours on, because Benton psychologically understands to attach the suffering to the getting drunk. And that makes an association to where it will make it less likely that I will get drunk again, although it will still be possible. But um, because that association is only so strong and it wears off. So it reminds me when my mother, because the woman tends to take on the habits of the man when she, you know, got with her current husband, not my father. He was a drunk at the time, and so she started drinking every day. And she fell off of a chair or something. I don't know what she was doing. She fell down and broke her arm. So for a while, she quit drinking because of the association between the broken arm and the drinking. And I said, yeah, but I hope you understand that will wear off over time. And she just went, no, no, it won't. And then of course, fast forward to like a year and a half later, and she's starting to drink again, and she admitted it. She was like, oh, you were right. I said, yeah, I do know what the fuck I'm talking about. How do you think I know? Do you think I'm telling you anything that I didn't experience myself? So it's to remember to remind myself, right? So in some ways, it's the forgetting of, just the levels of harm that are done to the body, even from a singular, bout of drinking, just one time. There's a fairly serious negative health consequences in the short run. And it's supposed to be that way, arguably. Um, yeah. So I think that's all I had to say about that. But yeah, 96 hours. And I'm talking about 96 hours after the alcohol was supposedly out of my system. I'm saying I drink Thursday night, and I would say by, I'm up and about every morning by like 3 a.m. So I would say the next day by 3 a.m., the alcohol was out of my system. So it's been 3 a.m. this morning was 96 hours. And I'm still feeling it to some extent. Because I'm like, why can't I take a deep breath? What's this? Why am I wanting to cough, but I'm not able to really cough hard enough to get whatever this is out of my lungs? It's like, oh shit. And I'm a little more, a little bit of fatigue in the morning. Like, oh yeah, what the fuck you got drunk 4 days ago, bozo? What do you think's going to happen? Especially at your age, buddy. So, I definitely see the triangulated spiritual attack around, me choosing to do a thing that led to me temporarily, you know, getting drunk. Uh, and here's the key in my world is, so this is what I mean by the middle ground. People don't realize that the pain and the struggle and the misery and the worry and the guilt and the fear and the shame is in that middle zone. So when I do fuck up and go drink and bebop around town and behave immaturely and make a fool out of myself on stream, I just accept it for what it is. I enjoy it and I move on with my life. Now I learn what's to be learned from it on the back end. What I don't do is live in that middle zone between proper action and improper action. It's like, hey, I'm either all the way in proper action most of the time, or if I swing into temporary improper action, better enjoy it. And I think that's part of fully enjoy it and experience it for what it is, and then go right back to the other extreme versus, and that is a version of make the tree good or make the tree rotten. Better hot or cold, the lukewarm is spat out of the mouth. It's that middle zone where all the worry, the fear, the guilt, the trepidation, the gnashing of teeth or whatever, the just however you want to describe that. Stay out of that zone. And I rarely give advice, but that ain't the place to be. Now it's probably better than destroying oneself with alcohol. It's less bad, right? But no guilt, no shame. Just, yeah, I got drunk. Oh, you relapsed? What do you mean? I'm not sober. What are you talking about? I fucking inhaled weed vapes for like 3 straight months, all day, every day. What are you talking about? That's equal. The way I use cannabis, that's just as intoxicating as. In fact, I was less intoxicated from 8 beers over 8 hours with 2 separate meals in the middle. I was less intoxicated than just hitting vapes all day. Like, what are we talking about here? Yeah, I could have drank more and gotten there. Thankfully, I didn't. Um, I think if I'd stuck to the wine with enough time in between, so the three 5-ounce glasses of wine, then think if I'd had 3 hours in between, then another three 5-ounce glasses, I don't think it would have had nearly the negative consequences. But then also, here's the thing about drinking: it's to observe my own thoughts and say, well, are you now talking yourself into more drinks? See? And that's where the alcoholism comes from, which is, I'm not an alcoholic. Alcoholism is a behavior or an activity. It's a practice, right? Have I practiced alcoholism? Yeah, absolutely, at times, right? Have I gone to alcohol AA meetings and said, yeah, hey, my name's Jason, I'm an alcoholic? Yeah, because I was there, and it seems insane to actually go to the AA meeting and not participate fully. And then it's like, do I really want to split hairs with these people? It's just easier to say, to identify that way, but to understand in my own mind that, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not. I even had somebody tell me that. They were like, hey, man, I don't think you're actually an alcoholic. And they tried to send me to Moderators Anonymous. But I was only there because my best homeless friend was there every morning, and that's the only way I could find him. I could only track him down at the time. And then here's where the parasocial aspects of identifying with somebody else. There was a trans person who most likely found me attractive, and again, I'm quite tolerant and accepting of people individually, so I didn't care that it was a man that was dressing in a feminine way as a woman. I don't care. But yeah, if I accidentally call it sir or he, then that's their problem. I can't be expected to live at the time 42 years or whatever. The idea that I'm going to switch it up and perfectly perform these things is insane. Meanwhile, if I just choose not to, nobody can make me. But yeah, as long as that's understood, that this idea that, oh, I'm in trouble because I misgendered somebody, it's like, no, that's not my problem. That's your problem, partner. I want to tell you. But yeah, I'll do my best if I want to. Yeah, I think that's an appropriate, just in my opinion, that's an appropriate, way to treat the situation. It's like, yeah, I didn't mean anything by it, and I accidentally said he or whatever. It happens. Nothing, and accepting them as a human being, isn't that more important, right, than somebody who doesn't accept them as a human being, but somehow is able to perfectly use the pronouns? Because remember, the person who uses the pronouns perfectly, well, they don't lose face, but they're still free to passive aggressively not treat the human as if they might actually be a human, And so I guess they began to parasocially identify with, I'm pretty good at speaking, and my people liked when I shared or whatever. I kept it real. Oh, and some of those people some of those hardcore dry drunks that have been in those meetings for years, I took their shit for a while, and eventually, man, this old lady finally was the straw that broke the camel's back. And dude, I shared one day and I just let everybody have it. I said, listen, y'all, you think I'm going to come down here and y'all are going to come at me some type of way? Well, I'm finna fight fire with fire. And I told them exactly what I thought of them. And they knocked it the fuck off. And that's that spirit of righteousness. That's what I am coming out, right? I'm not supposed to let a bunch of, on some level, piece of shit dry drunks that ruin their own lives. I never ruined my life with alcohol, not in the long run, but I'm not coming down there to lord it over them. At a certain point, they're treating me like a piece of garbage. It's like, wait a minute, lady. Let's go ahead and clear the air here, right? What are we doing? But anyway, that's sort of the dragging me down to their level and thinking they can beat me with experience. It's like, oh no, you cannot. Either way, what do I win? Well, free coffee and donuts and getting to hang out with my buddy, apparently. Either way. So that's a homeless story. Before I ran Dark Glasses Woody off unintentionally. It was his fault, though. But either way, I'll accept 20% of the blame. Again, parasocial, right? Parasocially. But yeah, the trans person. So at a certain point, I never claimed that I was not drinking. Yeah, I was drinking beers every day. just not very many, because remember, living in the streets with nothing, it was just too unsafe to get drunk living that lifestyle. So it's funny how the person can somehow do a thing responsibly when they need to, right? Isn't that interesting? But yeah, I was drinking every day, almost every day, depending on if the budget allowed for it. And then they just heard me mention that in passing. Oh, I thought you were sober. It's like, why? What gave you that idea? I just said, I never claimed that. What are you talking about? Well, see, that they invented that in their head because they're idealizing. They've created an idea of what they think I am, and it's an idealized version, right? Like, what? I'm only even here to talk to Henry, and I'm only even sharing because I'm here. Like, what kind of crazy person would come to an AA meeting and not at least say, well, fuck it, I might as well. And it probably did make it easier not to, maybe get that third. I think I was still drinking Still Reserves back then. Maybe not to have that third Still Reserve 24-ouncer. At a certain point, my body just said, okay, no more with the malt liquor, no mas. In fact, it was Sparks, 16-ounce Sparks tapped me out in Portland. My body just, I would have like 3 sips, and my body was like, nope, you're done. I was like, really? Oh yeah, you're done. All right, well, back to the store for a Genesee, if that's how that's pronounced. Guess we'll get an actual beer then. Listen to the body. Nope, you're done. Dick Gregory claims it's the manganese, that the government or whoever puts a high amounts of manganese in the malt liquor to attack the blacks. But maybe, I don't know. Who knows? Could be. May peace be upon him, Brother Gregory. And probably Henry Hopper, who's probably no longer alive. Hard to see him making it through the pandemic because both of his parents died at their own hands individually in mental institutions. So I suspect he found his way out of this realm, although probably just only to return, right? And speaking of the getting drunk one time, I've had this thing historically where I'll rinse my eyes out, and then, I guess it's the eyes trying to adjust the level of moisture and maybe overcompensating. My eyes are kind of weeping. And recently I'd got to, and that is an immune system function. And recently I got to where that really wasn't happening so much. And now it's back. But we'll fix it. It's a process. 2 steps forward, but usually not 1 step back. But what else we got? Maybe some other homeless stories. I took some notes. People do like my homeless stories at times. Did some preaching yesterday outside the Bank of America. Started out just on a general financial system diatribe, and then transitioned into some preaching on Jesus. So that worked out. And this, okay, so the first drug addict, and we had a good conversation, and that spiritual attack, the first one, the triangulated spiritual attack, seemed to be playing on the human desire to want to be helpful, because he was mentioning, going to these various shaman and, taking psychedelics, and then now he's, maybe going to have to go back to rehab, and because he is, you can tell the guy's employable, and as a Jewish person from New York, and that he's going to have some connections to actually be able to get a job, but now he's driving Uber and renting the Uber, renting an electric car, and driving it around. I know people are anti-electric car, but for somebody driving Uber, it's probably pretty good in a big city where he can actually charge the thing and not have to pay the maintenance. Either way, but sort of, I could tell there was kind of a playing on the fact that I might want to try to, counsel him in some way, but managed to avoid that. And he mentioned some program by name, something about inner child or something. I guess it's probably well known in LA because, especially LA, big city people will tie a lot of this into just trendy movements, something that's trendy. So I guess he said it as if I would have ever heard of it, but I didn't know what he was talking about, and I just let it go. Maybe he thought I would be like, "Oh, really? What's that?" Hey, okay, hey, Seed, let me educate you, sir. And then, with my accent and being from Arkansas and all of these things, and um, sometimes I get condescended to, but I know what they're saying. Like I understand the concepts the whole way through, but I'm being talked to as if, it's like to sort of, kind of say a thing, but assume the person's not going to know what you're talking about, but the person does know what you're talking about. So those are interesting experiences from my perspective. I wish I can't remember the specifics on that, but kind of interesting with the old country accent and the, you know, even if I speak very deliberately, they're always going to be able to, at some point, the accent will slip. It's never really all the way gone anyway. Um, again, the realm has a sense of humor, at least. The vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. So this guy yesterday, and he sort of stirred up something in me that made me want to preach later, but I was taking notes sitting in my front seat with the door open, although the weather has shifted, so I could have been, hidden in the back, but whatever. And he comes along and wants me to drive him somewhere, right? So my reaction, because the meth heads have trained me so thoroughly in my times living in the streets with almost nothing, is the meth heads are very attracted to any opportunity to peruse another being's belongings and to possibly steal some of them. And they're very, very strongly attracted. So this car has just whatever's in it, that can be seen. And another reason to cover the windows is understanding the nature of the meth head, that it doesn't matter what the object is, because some people would apply their own logic and say, well, these objects are mundane and have effectively no value. It's like, that's not the point. These people go around town digging through the trash bins, just collecting whatever's in there and carrying it around with them. Like it doesn't really matter what you might think that the item is worth, right? If they see something and they want it, they might bust the window, right? And that's the main reason for covering the windows. And so my first thing is I get out of the car and close the door. Just like, yeah, I'm not going to have this person. I don't know this person. I'm not going to have them, coveting my belongings. And so then I walk away, but he's still talking to me. And so I turn and look at him. I go, "Oh, you talking to me?" Because remember, he's never officially engaged me in conversation, right? He's approached me and started talking. That in no way confers that I've consented to the interaction. So, I get out, close the door, walk away, turn my back on him, which is, some say don't do that, but I ain't worried. And then I turn back. I'm like, "Oh, you talking to me?" And then now he's some version of, I know I look disheveled, right? I guess just an acknowledgement that he's not coming across like somebody that would be trustworthy to put in my vehicle and drive him somewhere. And he's talking about wanting to go downtown, I think. And I've also trained myself not to listen to these people, because meth heads, one of the first things I learned, well, it took me a while to learn it, but when after I'd acclimated to homelessness, and I don't recommend that to anybody, that's certainly, that changes a person. But I recognized that a lot of these meth heads were draining my energy through these their detailed stories. They're fascinated with overly detailed stories, right? And that with my hypervigilance, and again, I don't have ADD, I have the opposite of ADD, that I actually trained myself to not really listen to these people while also picking up whatever key points I might need to pick up. It's like an auditory version of what I do with skimming when I read, unless it's like an actual, reading an entire book type shit. And so something about downtown, well, okay, I'm looking at the guy. He's clearly been up day after day after day doing drugs. And also, I know where we are in the disability cycle of misery. So probably he's been on the verge of human trafficked. And look, this is not hyperbole, because remember, there's plenty of people with high incomes all around in apartments, right? Or money to pay for hotels. And these drug addicts, when the money comes in at the first of the month, some people start getting their checks at the end of the month, but it's really that from the first, people start getting their money. And so this is what I call the disability cycle of misery, where especially the hardcore drug users, well, they have free access to their drugs for at least generally around 2 weeks minimum, and that can extend longer. So the farther we get to in the first of the month, I believe it's today or tomorrow. Is it today? I think it's tomorrow. I don't know. Yes, tomorrow. So there's more of these people. And if you ever, especially you folks that don't go to big cities, you might see somebody freaking out in the city. They're like, oh, that person might be on drugs. I'm like, no, that's lack of drugs. If they had their drugs, they'd be fine. Right. And not fine in the conventional sense. I just mean fine in that they wouldn't be here behaving so strangely. They would actually just be somewhere else, doing their drugs. This is the lack of drugs. So this is a person who, meanwhile, just how about walk your happy ass downtown, partner? Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, meanwhile, I walk downtown regularly from here and walk and back. This guy can't do 5 miles. I mean, he probably can't do 5 miles. Not without stopping every half a mile to rest. And then in his own ADD and his own lack of focus and concentration, mentally, can he even hike his happy? What I should have just done is said, no, but I'll hike your happy ass down there. Because hell, I need to go anyway. Yeah, I mean, that's what's funny, is not knowing what to do in the moment. And with a spirit of service, I could have been like, absolutely not. If you think I'm putting you in my vehicle, you're out of your fucking mind. And I would say it just like that. I might try to make it funny, but that would be the message. Like, clearly sir, please do not talk to me as if you think I'm stupid, right? And does this vehicle look like it's regularly driven? Number one. Number two, I mean, on what planet would I just put you in my car and drive you somewhere? Are you insane? In what world would that ever happen? But yeah, I'm happy to help people if I can actually help them. Yeah, that would have been the move as well. If you think you can hang out here for about an hour, I'll fucking hike your happy ass down there. You can follow me to downtown if you want. Whatever. Wouldn't be the first time some version of that has happened. And I don't ever do drugs, so there's no, that's not the barbershop. And the haircut barbershop analogy wouldn't play a factor. Having never done any actual drugs in my life, cannabis and psychedelics I don't put in that category. Booze, of course, the hardest drug of all, as we know, but that's available anywhere. Don't need to go to the dealer. The government is your dealer on that one. I'm your pusher, says the government. But I said, and see, when they get into these mental states, they can't shut the fuck up. So it's like, how is he going to have a conversation with me and talk the whole time? So I'm like, well, I can preach on Jesus. I said, if you want to hear a tent revival sermon, right? I said, other than that, you best get to stepping. Said it just like that. Other than that, you best get to stepping, because that's all I can do for you, sir. Because I'm not smart enough to figure out until the next day that, well, I guess I could have, hung out with him long enough to help him get to downtown. It's probably all he needed was just some assistance in getting downtown. And he probably understood that he wasn't going to be able to walk all the way there. And then, in his weakened state, what predators are going to view him as prey on the hike over there, right? And then his own fears around just being in a fearful, spiritually fallen state, right? And of course, the demons within him under demonic oppression, that's the last thing they want, but they want their drugs. And for whatever reason, I'm now being viewed as a means to an end, right? And then half these people, just because I'm thin and, and white, perhaps he's And I wouldn't believe me that I wasn't even, at least a casual user, because I've never in all my years in the streets, I've never met a street person who wasn't at least a casual user of meth, and I mean ever. So yeah, I wouldn't believe me either. I'm the exception that proves the rule, apparently. Although, I used to somebody would pass me a bowl of weed or whatever, and it's like, I'm pretty sure they've smoked meth in there. But then I don't know to what extent just a regular old Bic lighter activates methamphetamine. But, the chances I've consumed some unknowingly or just inhaled some because I went into a bathroom and didn't realize what cloud had been left behind before I took half a breath and was like, oh shit, wish I'd known to hold my fucking breath before I walked in here. But beyond that, no, absolutely not. 0 times. And so remember, he's still talking. So I just straight up told him, I said, listen, man, I said, the sermon is you shut the fuck up and listen. The sermon isn't we have a back and forth and you talk. But if you want a sermon, I'll happily preach a sermon to you right here. Right. But again, remember, the demons ain't going to stick around for no sermon, but they still want what they want. The demons, the demonic oppression. And so then we get into, he wants to retort. I said, man, you're talking. And I made the motion for zip your lips. And then I put my hand to my ear. And then he started talking again. I said, listen, man, I'm not going to learn anything from you, buddy. I'm not going to learn anything from listening to you talk. And then he gets into, oh, well, this doesn't sound loving or spiritual. I'm like, buddy, get to stepping. Now it's round 3 of get to stepping. Like, what are you doing? What is this? And then he's walking away. I, sort of loudly just, address the fact that he's under demonic oppression. And see, what's interesting about these people is they almost always verbalize that they are demonic. Almost always. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he acknowledged his own being influenced by demons, under the oppression of demons in his own way. So and I don't even want to repeat what he would have said, because to repeat it would then be to ascribing it to myself, at least in the forms of speech. Right. They're proud of it in a way. They earned it in a way. And it's very real. And this idea that, well, that's just in the cities, you're crazy. It's everywhere. Wherever you live, right? Or wherever you drive to go to the big box store, and there ain't nobody who isn't off grid that doesn't regularly drive to the big box store, wherever that's located. There's 100% drug addicts who are under demonic oppression. I don't care what you say. Yes, there are. To believe otherwise is called delusional and in denial. There's nobody that can hear my voice that's not a shut-in, right? And shut-ins probably have neighbors that meet these conditions. But folks want to live in a vacuum and say, well, that can't touch me. Oh, it does touch you, whether you like it or not. It's just how it is, folks. This idea that people were, oh, it's America, it's the greatest country ever, and mom and apple pie, and American exceptionalism, the American dream, and this old, like, almost Depression era notion of, people sticking together, and yeah, it's the descendants of those folks 3 generations later, and they're all on methamphetamine and opiates and under demonic oppression. And, is it sad? Yeah, it is. Is it unfortunate? Sure, but it's the state of things as they are. Meanwhile, how can society, and how can it ever be dealt with appropriately if it's not acknowledged? It has to be acknowledged, or it can't be dealt with. So the people who just want to put their head in the sand and pretend like that's not a thing, well, it is a thing. And, well, how do you know, Benton? Because I've been everywhere. I've been to more places than I haven't been in this country. And oh, well, no, not truck driving. I went to 40 states before I ever had a CDL. I've been to most of the country within the last, 2 years. And that's not an exaggeration. I'd say mostly it's the lesser populated areas. I'm talking like Montana, some of those places I haven't necessarily been to. Um, but there's not many exceptions. I've been pretty much everywhere that has any significant population whatsoever in the last 2 years. And a lot of it not truck driving. A lot of it just driving around in my car with my money, just going places. Because why not? Because I'm here, it's America, and they still let you do it. As now I'm reading articles about, well, are Americans now more docile than the Chinese? Yeah, they are. I think so. If China is what they say it is, yeah, I think so. Maybe we will read. Can I read that article without becoming too attached to the realm itself? Let me check the notes here. Get a swig of water. I'm neglecting to. I need something. I need a spittoon in here. I'm rinsing my mouth out, but I'm swallowing it, which I think's not as good as spitting it out. Got to keep what's left of my dental health here. Very important. Let's see. Yeah, I ordered my napkins. I got these $3 for 80 napkins from Amazon. And, again, brick and mortar. What would the equivalent of that same product in a store would be double the price. Now, you folks, most of you have a Walmart Supercenter, and they sell the same item for the same price. Because remember, Amazon, because a lot of these folks have cars and will drive to the Supercenter that's about 15 miles away. Well, Amazon wants them to be able to order it either to their home or to, in my case, an Amazon locker. So this morning I went and picked up my $3 worth of napkins, because when I dry out my kettle, if I use toilet paper, little bits of toilet paper end up in the kettle, so it's worth the money in the long run. And sometimes I run out of the free toilet paper that I get out of the bathrooms of the park here. And I don't steal them. I wait till the person replaces them, and then there's just a roll there. And I know, yes, ooh, gross, but at a certain point, you just do what you got to do. Humans adapt to the environment, and I can at least take a couple of layers of the outside off and throw that in the toilet. But yeah, just the whole Amazon thing in general is fascinating. And while I continue to procrastinate with fasting, and I don't mean intermittent fasting, I mean actual fasting, because I basically intermittent fast more or less every day. Been doing that for a long ass time, and not on purpose. It's just how my eating schedule comes out. But now I'm buying even more food. So yesterday went to Whole Foods to pick up a case of sardines that they don't sell in the store for $1.80, but I can buy on Amazon for $1.80. And they used to ship this to an Amazon locker, except they finally figured out, oh, we own Whole Foods, so let's only send these items, these grocery type items, let's only send them to Whole Foods, Amazon counter inside of Whole Foods, because I went ahead and, while I'm here, I might as well, they have the best price I found on prunes, might as well re-up on the prunes, right? And this is the corporate hellscape. This is the, competition is a sin, meaning, Walmart and Amazon aren't necessarily directly competing as much as it's all of the large retailers competing against the smaller corporations to hold them back, right? So that they don't ever get a full seat at the table necessarily. Or it's like a Safeway, whoever owns Safeway, Albertsons, Vons, and all of this, they've acknowledged during the pandemic that they just straight up price gouge. Because yeah, there are people who will just, well, there's the fucking Vons, and they're just going to go in there and pay whatever. Yeah, those people exist, and in a crowded city, you can get a certain number of those people. But now they're building a Sprouts nearby, and just I don't, folks don't need me to explain the corporate hellscape to you. Uh, that's a ever-present, pervasive. It's just part of being a human at this point. We humans have internalized this corporate. Me too. Like I hate corporations, and that's what I talk about when I'm an anarchist at heart on some level. But then I love Starbucks, Walmart, super centers, because I do have experience with their corporate culture. Not a fan of that, but I love Walmart, super centers, Amazon, and Starbucks. Like, how does that work? Right. But now that I'm off the coffee and my hippy dippy uh, grocery store has yerba mate, if I want to go in there at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning when when the library was closed and I want to charge my power bank, well, yeah, I'll go ahead and pay $2.50 for a mate, same price as coffee, because I'm there and I might as well buy something other than just 98 cents of filtered water, right? Why wouldn't I if I'm able to afford it? And thank you for the generous donations. Much appreciated. Do appreciate the generous donations. Um, so yeah, the Amazon thing is always a trip, really. So today I'm most likely hiking to a different Whole Foods to pick up another case of apricots. And then yesterday, it's so busy in that Whole Foods, or I'm just trying to get in and get out, the one downtown. So I looped around the side of the store and the other side of the store that I usually don't go to. And the hot bar, man, it's like 3 times as big as this other one that I go to. And it was hard to go past the hot bar because I'm like, man, that stuff looks good. And I'm able to resist the pizza at the Whole Foods, the lesser location, because they really only have pepperoni and cheese. But then, I'm looking at the pizza. I'm like, damn, I don't even remember what it was, but I was like, oh my goodness. But managed to resist. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. This long ass line is for the self checkout. Because I think I'd only ever been in there early in the morning. So I was like walking around the side of the self checkout and there was always a machine available. So either I was just coming in through the wrong way and nobody cared, or maybe I was unknowingly cutting in line, but hopefully not. I'm not a line cutter, but that was interesting, and that sort of shows how something can be right there in our face and we don't see it, you know. Because if there's an area designed for people to stand in line, but nobody's standing in line, is that even noticeable? Since I had never physically walked over to that area of the store. It's a big store too, and I know people like, oh, whole paycheck. Yeah, except it's fantastic if the being only ever buys things that are appropriately priced, and like the dark chocolate, they finally ran out of the dark chocolate because I'm in there. I'm like, man, am I gonna have to buy more dark chocolate? And so I went over to the shelf and I'm like, oh, thankfully they're out of the 100%, because people are stocking up, air quotes, in this economy, right? So I'm like, oh, thankfully they finally ran out, because they're $5.29 normally, and they've been on sale for $3.50. And that's the thing about, oh, inflation, inflation, inflation. But part of the inflation is the corporate hellscape, because in the notion of competition is a sin. Well, when the hippy dippy store puts it on sale for $4 and it's normally $5.69, so it's 40 cents more than Whole Foods, and then I still don't even want to pay $5.29. It's really too much for my budget, but I will pay the $4 at the hippy dippy store. But then they've been out because people have stocked up on it, and then Whole Foods is competing not against the few retailers on its level. It's competing. Well, now, and Whole Foods has got wrapped into that. Remember, because Whole Foods started independent of Amazon and now has been bought by Amazon, and um, these corporate dynamics are. I don't know how many people are aware of them and the way they change and evolve and sort of unfold in real time. I don't know that most folks are aware. Um, so I'm always interested by that. But and then knowing I'm being manipulated. I know the app manipulates me. The app knows when I'm truck driving and I'm in, money's hitting my account every week. They know. Amazon pays money to get access to the data. They know, and whenever I put their app on my phone, I didn't read the fine print. I'm sure I agreed to let them spy on me to some extent. They know how much. They know I've got money. And then they know, okay, well, he keeps looking at these certain items, but clearly he's not going to pay this price. So just every once in a while, oh, here's the push notification, and it just happens to be 40% off. And it's like they make me an offer I can't resist. And I end up, that's how I got this power bank, which thank God it's worked out great for me. But I don't think I ever would have paid $99 for it. But finally, I think I paid, I don't even remember what I paid, but it was ridiculously cheap, compared to the normal price. And, well, I think I basically paid the same, except I got a 100-watt charger, and a really nice, 10-foot cable, more or less for free. I think is what ended up happening. So it's like $35 worth of stuff. So I think I paid a hundo, but I got like $135 worth of stuff because it doesn't come with the 100-watt charger. It's a separate purchase, sir. We rapid charging. And everybody, it's funny when I try to tell these homeless people about the rapid charging, they all are thinking that they're used to having to just pick one day a week and just stay at the library all day to charge their power bank, right? Or leave it in the charging kiosk, or God forbid, leave it with a human and find out if they can trust that human. But they want to know, well, how many times will it charge my phone? And I'm like, I have no idea, because it charges from 20% to 80% in 30 minutes. So who cares? I don't even care how many times it charges my phone. I charge this bitch every day in 30 minutes. Who gives a fuck? And how quick in an environment of an ever-changing environment of rapid turmoil, upheaval, and change, how quickly can the being adapt to the unfolding change? That's also a factor. Thank you all for liking the stream. Much appreciated. Haven't read the chat in a while. I've been riffing. Much appreciated. Yes, sir. We don't always preach on Jesus around here, but oh man. Yeah, stretch it out, buddy. Definitely. And it's not all the booze with the inflammation. I have just a normal. Look. Can we just face the reality that there's a base level of inflammation just built into the realm? Wherever you live in this country, whatever your body is adapted to at the level of poisons, toxins, Wi-Fi, fucking cell towers, just whatever that is, now Starlink, I guess, there's just there's a base level of inflammation going on to be a human. And I might share it on my post tab. I found a really good video about Depression era hobos, and it was based on this guy whose father was a Depression era hobo, and of course this guy's now elderly, and his father kept a journal for an entire year of hoboing during the Depression. I think all of 1932. And see, this is the type of person who he set his mind to. He was going to do an entire year riding the rails. In a hobo, they travel for work. They do whatever work's available for the most part. And that was fascinating to realize. His experience as a person in poverty and the Depression, traveling for work, was the descriptions of the meals he was eating, and he was either working and he would show up and he would just ask somebody for free food, and they would say, yeah, can you go chop some wood, and go chop wood for 30 minutes, or just whatever that was, and then if it was an actual job, it'd be, maybe the day's pay would be 30 cents or whatever, or 15 cents, and then the negotiation would be like, well, does that include a meal, right? And all of that, and then sometimes just being down and out, and just people just feeding them, and then funny because women, it was funny, these women, I guess with no man around, they would say, hey, if you don't, knowing that he's going to go try to catch the freight train after she feeds him, and she's like, hey, if you don't catch the freight train, you can come back here, and sleep in the barn or whatever. But, it's kind of probably seemingly almost implied, because the guy, he never at least admitted to it in his journal that I heard, that he never went back to accept the invitation, right? Which I think is kind of interesting morally, and just, I'm sure the women were lonely on some level, right? But, and her not being being a woman of virtue, just well, maybe accidentally something happens, just sort of, if it happens, it happens, right? That wasn't, and it wasn't ever talked about in the video, but, that would be a version of that. And then, so the Depression era hobos, the sense of camaraderie, the organic food, right? Uh, Mostly anyway. The health benefits of you want to talk about fasting. Well, what about just ending up in a desert and having to walk, getting kicked off a train and having to walk like 20 miles or whatever, with and running out of water, and then now we got people, now I'm watching YouTube videos about so-called hard fasting, which is intentionally choosing not to eat or drink water. Well, the Depression era hobos were doing their own version of that, except they didn't have no choice, right? And then again, you remember the mind, body, spirit benefits of all of these things. And then, people of today sort of scratching their head, and kind of in a way romanticizing that, oh, well, those were, moral people back then, and this and that. Well, no, they were less fallen. They were less fallen within themselves, mind, body, and spirit, but they were already fallen, meaning, they didn't have the intellect necessarily, or just the, now we get to the humiliation and the obedience and all of this. They didn't have whatever would have been needed to actually resist the government at the level of, why is there a depression in the first place? Because some would say, well, it was the Federal Reserve starting in 1913. Well, that's not really the case. America was already in these boom bust economic cycles by the 1800s. And in fact, if you look at Andrew Jackson as president, fighting against the first bank of the United States. That was the first central bank, apparently. And I'm sure it wasn't the first, but probably the first official central bank. And then there was a second bank of the United States. And, all of these things, right? And so, you see in the history of America, maybe at a certain point, the people were at least capable of electing a person who would recognize the dangers of usury and, everything that's associated with what, a particular has been identified as a particular enemy, the so-called synagogue of Satan. And maybe there is something to that, right? Perhaps, but either, what's the difference? I mean, if people are going to obey, what does it matter if there's a particular group of people that are associated with this so-called synagogue of Satan, if the individuals in society won't bootstrap internally, mind, body, and spirit, to be capable of resisting such a thing at the level of not playing into it, right? While for some reason accepting this mind control that they're so wonderful and powerful and awesome because they were born in America, I live in America. I think I want to know you, know you. All this propaganda. I think I want to show you, show you. It's just a part. It's basically a party. At a certain point, the air quotes, they turned America into a party. And this is what we see with any sort of idea of a protest or social change. Yeah, humans are willing to possibly show up physically, but it's a party every time. There's nothing wrong with having a party, but, you know, at a certain point, it's a recognition. Oh, they prefer to just have, like, you can just have a party. Why does it have to be called a protest? People could just go party if they want to. Why does it need to be a protest? You know, all of this ice out of LA stuff, and then here I am on a Saturday or a Sunday in Echo Park, and on Sunset, and I see a big flatbed truck go by with the jam pumping out the jams on a gigantic Bluetooth speaker, and it's a bunch of brown people hanging out in the back of this flatbed with sides on it so they don't fall out. And it's a party. And not 5 minutes before, because I was delivering a tirade in the streets, I predicted it. I even said, look at all of these protests. It turns into a party. Not 5 minutes later, here came the party. I said, see, I told you. And then here came another truck just like it right behind them. And again, have a party. Who cares? But to actually think that's going to do something, while all of those people, 80 to 90% of those people work for corporations and pay federal income tax and pay for ICE, right? And if I go back to truck driving, I'm only doing it on a 1099, and I am not paying the taxes. And the government can do whatever they want to do. I don't give a fuck. And I'm not going to justify it except to say what I see when I look at society is I don't see anybody getting ahead in the current environment who's not doing so through immoral, unethical, fraudulent, and or illegal means. See? So if I know it's against the law, but it's not against my ethics to pay federal income tax. In fact, it's against my ethics at this point to pay federal income tax, if we want to be real about it. It's not against my morality to not so-called render unto Caesar, because that meaning is not properly understood. Okay, that's a lie when they say that means to pay your taxes. No, it doesn't. That means Jesus wasn't free to tell the people in front of the Pharisees not to pay their taxes, because the court case would have began immediately, and the man's mission wasn't done yet. He wasn't free to say, well, yeah, don't pay your taxes. Right? And probably wouldn't have advised that anyway. Leading by example. Remember, after baptism and starting his ministry, Jesus paid no tax and did not work a job and did not handle money. So that's probably the example to be followed, I'm assuming. And how many of society's problems would that solve? Meanwhile, everybody goes into a panic. Well, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for that? I don't know, man. Remove the money from the equation. Are you really telling me that this society's so functional that you're worried about the levels of dysfunction it might fall into if the money was taken away? Who needs the system to operate? Us, meaning the proletariat and the workers? Are we more dependent on the operation of the system? Or are the rich people more dependent? Because you can just turn that into a Mexican standoff game of chicken. But the working class, the proletariat, can't ever understand what motivates the rich person. Because the prole or the worker says, well, why do people need billions of dollars? If I ever got 10 million, that'd be plenty for me and at least my living family. It's like, yeah, why are you projecting your thought process onto people born into wealth? It's because if they don't see their wealth increase every new moment into perpetuity for the entirety of their lives, they go into an existential crisis because their identity is based on ever-expanding wealth. And that's their birthright. So if a person is born into a wealthy family and a bloodline, they're not what I am. See, and now we're getting closer to the heart of the matter. George W. Bush ain't what I am because he was born into a bloodline, meaning his birthright is to see his personal wealth and the wealth of his family every new moment. Now it's here, now it's gone, now it's here, now it's gone, for the entirety of his life. His wealth and his family's wealth expands. Because if it doesn't, he as a human will go into an existential crisis because he won't know who he is, because his identity formed in relation to this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, always solving equationally and mathematically for waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, right? And creating an image to uphold before Moloch, having been sacrificed to Moloch, as virtually everyone is, he won't know who the fuck he is because his identity is based in relation to this inverted world. See, actually, his is not, but his is a direct. See, the people are being faked out. So the people who are what I am are being faked out by the inversion. George W. Bush, he is the inversion. That's a 1-to-1. That's not an inversion in his world. That's what he is. He is the thing itself. So if the thing itself, and his birthright is that the thing itself, so what I am is never ending, always expanding, supreme authority, love, creation, source of life, right? All positive characteristics. That's my birthright. Birthright is to be one with the continuous perpetual expansion of that. This realm of antithesis, and so that is proposition, this realm of antithesis has to match that performance, meaning there has to be a so-called elite wealthy class, and they match the never-ending expansion through money. So it's the antithesis is the money system, thesis is super intelligent power and force of love and creation and life itself. So the money system is to seek to disprove and usurp what I am through death and dead money and this dead system of things. And it does that by the birthright through bloodlines and families and, cremations of care and whatever demonic sorcery and invocation and incantation. See? And it is blasphemy in the Holy Spirit at the level of to get the people who are born with that birthright of one with the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation, is to have them, because of the attacks of the inverted world, to have them treat that highest possible form of blessing, right, as if it were a curse. And now this is the Christ story. It's the Christ story. If you say, well, Christ died for the sins of this world, that's based on the dead, inverted notion of this world based on antithesis, because remember, antithesis can only understand what Christ is, what I am, what you may be. It can only relate to that concept based on the lack of the characteristics. It's backwards engineering and backwards rationalizing what it thinks that to be, and then mocking it, ridiculing it, while also undermining it, usurping it if possible, and aping it. And that's this whole notion of, well, they, meaning Hillary Clinton and the reptiles and all of this, they accuse you of doing what they're doing. Yeah, because that's the only way they understand what you're doing, right? It's through the inverse of what you're doing, right? It's a mirror. It's a mirror image. See? So the Christ story and this idea of Christ, how can supreme authority, that's a violation. If people say that Christ died for our sins, so-called, and the sins of so what's sin in that context? The sins of the flesh? The sins that are associated with what? Loving money, loving death, loving this world. And the Bible says that all they that hate love, right, that hate God, so-called, air quotes, are lovers of death. Well, that's to be of this world. That's to be of death, see? So the idea of Jesus Christ as Lord dying and sacrificing himself for your so-called sins of the flesh and the sins of this world, that's an inverted violation. That's to treat blessing as if it were a curse. That's not what's represented by the Christ sacrifice. Sorry, it's not, Christians. That's why people want to say, oh, well, it looks like Orthodox Christianity is the closest thing. No, it's not. It might be the least fallen, but Christianity is fallen if it believes that Christ sacrificed himself for our sins and the sins of this world. What, the sins of my dead flesh? What are you talking about? What I am can never be marred or attached to that. What I am can only even inhabit this physical experience via delusion and the idea that this dead flesh could ever experience life. So if in some way this life That's not life. So if from the perspective of what I am, this is actually an experience of death, then this is also death vicariously experiencing life at the same time. See? Now we have yin and yang. Now we've come full circle all over again. See? It's each form experiencing the other, but not fully, because what I am can't experience death because it'll never know it. And antithesis or death can't experience life because it will never know it. So now here we are in a waking dream, surreal unreality, a delusion and illusion. That's what this place is, right? The place can't ever be alive. The air, the trees, the mountains, the streams can't live. Your body can't live. Sorry. Just like what you are, if you are what I am, can't die. Because if the grass and the trees and the air and your pet dog can live, then what you are can die. It has to work in both directions. So for what I am to never have a beginning and never have an end, this place has to have a beginning and an end. Or at least the experience of beginning and ending. See? Meanwhile, the terra firma is apparently always here, as much as they tell us that, well, the Big Bang and it just began one day. Well, yeah, that was when the delusion started. But when did the delusion start? See, there again, time, space, location, place in the context of this delusion, right? Meanwhile, there's never not been thesis and antithesis, because in order for that to be the case, there would have to be the possibility of nothing. And almost all philosophers agree that's not possible. So if there has to be something, there is proposition or thesis, meaning there has to be antithesis. So does it matter? The Big Bang and all of it? Well, who cares? Meanwhile, it's just this idea, oh, this system of things is unsustainable. No, it's not. It's dead. It's animated death, death warmed over. It's animated death, death warmed over. And remember, it's always there. Antithesis is always there. And I guess can it figure out a way to convince expanding creation to subvert creative force into creating a delusion? To creating a realm that enables an experience of death, unlocks the achievement within the experience, within existence. It unlocked the achievement of experience via delusion. Just as what I am born into the delusion unlocked the achievement of true knowledge of what I am. See, again, inverted, mirrored. All truths are merely half-truths in this place. And the idea that this is a place is a half-truth. So keep talking about the shape of the place. Yeah, keep trying to figure out the proper half-truth. Good job. Good job. As if that will ever amount to a hill of beans. So, and that's why it's a violation for Benton to too strongly identify with talking about the economy or what the government's doing or the political system, or now they're giving lip service to fixing truck driving. Who cares? It's all dead anyway. We know its value. We've taken its measure. We see it for what we have the capacity to see it for what it is. And I mean individually, if what I am, if what you are is what I am. I don't mean as a group or as a whole. That's not going to happen, because the moment we get into a group or a collective or a herd, now people begin to fantasize that group will solve problems. No, it won't. It will create problems. It won't solve any problems. It will create problems. Problem solving is individual. Group level is problem creation. Individual problem solving, group level problem creation. See? While people believe it to be the opposite. Again, Gandhi said what? Be the change you want to see in the world? Well, that's only ever inside of me. I don't have power to change this world externally. But then people will tell you to your face that they believe they have the power to change the world. Which world? The internal world or the external world? Because anybody that thinks they can change this external world one iota is out of their fucking minds. And they need to go into their mind. That's where the power is, the power of the mind. Oh, they're not going in there. That's scary. That feels some type of way. Okay, cowards, then don't. I don't give a fuck. I've already done it. And maybe I will, they will put me in federal prison for not paying taxes. Good, I'll just fuck off to the hole. I know how to misbehave and get put in the hole. I'll just sit in there cross-legged. Hell, if them monks can figure out how to leave their body, I can figure it out too. That's your 4-minute mile. If them monks really fucking left their body and then self-immolated, if that really happened, and who knows? Well, if they can do it, I can do it. And it's the prison's problem what to do with the body. I can figure it out. If I live long enough. Either way, ascend about this peace. Ascension. First within the individual, then up out of the delusion. And once the delusion is ascended out of, where does the being go? Oh, now the delusion's gone, one with the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation. Source of all. Right? The phenomenon that what I am is never not one with. It doesn't have a time, it doesn't have a space, it doesn't have a location, it doesn't have a place. All of that exists within it. But inverted world wants to say no. The idea of so-called God exists outside of it's an inversion. So the idea of Christ, it's an inverted story. The reality, what the entire point of the Christ story, he showed that it's possible when refusing to identify with this world of death as if it had any capacity for life whatsoever. There's nothing that this realm can do to him, to what he is, can't ever be touched by this realm, to surrender and to just allow it to happen, and to then show that what Christ was is the same thing that I am, and it is victory over death, because it will never know death. That's the entire point of the Christ story. It's a 4-minute mile. It's to show everybody, hey, silly people, this is what's possible. It's not to dogmatically say now, turn this into a religion and, have liturgy and rituals and the body of Christ and all of this. That's mockery, that's ridicule, that's inversion. It's to show there's no valid reason to fear anything that happens here. There's no valid reason to be anxious. There's no valid reason to experience any negative state of being whatsoever. It has nothing to do with redemption for sin. It's Christ showing the way that if you are what Christ was energetically, that force can't experience any death or negative states of being only within this delusion, which is actually a collaboration, like it or not. It's a collaboration between expansion and everything that can properly be said to exist, and the antithesis, or which is proposition, and the lack of all of that, which is antithesis, working in conjunction with each other. But remember, death can't know life. There is no experience there. There's no consciousness there. There's no redemptive value there. Death ain't much. There's just nothing there. So that's why it seems so terrifying. That's why it seems so painful. Pain don't hurt. I've been a pain don't hurt motherfucker since I was a teenager in a dentist chair, imposing my will on a dentist who didn't think I would sit there and let him drill 3 of my cavities, because he was trying to milk every nickel he could out of my family who had money temporarily. And he was a servant of death via money. And I was a representative of the most super intelligent power and force of love and creation. And what he was couldn't defeat what I am. See? What are you going to tell me? And that's what I learned, everything I needed to know about pain. Yeah. Would I want to go do some fucking Alexander Solzhenitsyn Gulag Archipelago version of getting all kind of crazy tortures described in that book? Hell no. But fuck, if we have to. I mean, if that's the way it's got to be, that's the Christ story. If that's the way it's got to be, that's the way it's got to be. Because what Christ was can't fear that. See, the only way out is through. And then you can read about Buddhism and Hinduism and non-attachment and the cycle and fucking delusion. You can read about that till you're blue in the face. Who cares? Yeah, I learned enough of it to suit my purposes, and I moved on to other shit. Or other blessings, see? Because part of me is still so of this world, it calls things that are wondrous shit. Dung. Well, does it matter? I mean, what's the difference? Does that even matter as long as I know what I'm doing? As long as the being knows what the being's doing. The vast majority of everybody out here has no fucking idea what they're doing. None. But they're sophisticated, they're over-socialized, and in some ways it's why I prefer at times to wander around the areas where it's people who aren't over-socialized, just to be around them to some extent, even though I can't talk to them and they can't really talk to me. And hell, at this point, the government's got them convinced that I'm some representation of the force that first invited them here for labor and is now kicking, half of them out of the country or whatever. Because they haven't been socialized enough. They haven't assimilated because they're still too expressive of what they very well may be inside of themselves. And Americans say, oh, come to America, speak English, assimilate. To what? Over socialization and serving death and serving money and serving corporations and a corporate hellscape and banks? You're mad at these people because they come here and they can't quite just hop to and immediately start double dutching like y'all double dutch because you was born here and now you've fully fucking merged with the corporate hellscape. Now it's a never-ending corporate hellscape inside of you and inside of me to some extent. But you want to blame people who came up from the dirt and this place can't kill them and it can't kill their cultures and it can't kill their ways of life. And it offers them, like Christ in the desert, it offers them the kingdoms of this world on some level. And yeah, some of them can't resist it. And next thing you know, here they are. Right? Because they're not, they don't know what they are. Just like Americans don't know what they are. So they end up here. Right? And Americans end up in the plight that they're in because Benton as a truck driver pretty much can't work as a truck driver because the government and these systems are bringing people from foreign countries. And now, the federal government is going to acknowledge it. And the federal government is going to blame it on the states. Well, it's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA. The states ain't in charge of it. Now, yes, state of California issues licenses. Well, who created that situation? The feds decided it. And people say, oh, well, Americans would never accept, a federal driver's license. Bullshit. Americans will tolerate anything whatsoever. Americans obey. Just about everybody here was issued a Social Security card. Oh, well, Americans would never accept the national ID. Yeah, right up until they won't. Right up until they accept it. What are you talking about? So part of there being each individual state issues driver's licenses, including commercial driver's license, which, some would say there's no such thing as a non-commercial driver's license. Okay, touche. Either way, that's probably true based on the transportation code and the actual laws. Yes, I do have an understanding of some of these dynamics, folks. Yes, I do. And it's not because of a very famous and popular content creator in the space. I knew some of this before I ever knew who that person was, believe it or not. Some of us just like to learn shit. But either way, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I met my straw man many years ago. So do you think is this system even capable of putting me in federal prison? And if it does, I'll just alchemize that. Because what I am can't fear righteously accepting 100 cents on the dollar temporarily for my labor, which is my property. It belongs to me. It doesn't belong to the government. It doesn't belong to Benito Mussolini's helicopter hand. I don't need the government. The government needs me. I don't need the government. The government needs me. See, I don't need the church. The church needs me. We got it all backwards, folks. It's inverted. And you know what the proper strategy is for an inversion? You invert the inversion. It's pretty easy, ain't it? You turn it against itself. Oh, the system says I got to go work or I don't eat. Okay. We're just not going to go to work. And then we'll just, and there's no we. I want to make this clear. There's no, I'm in a thought experiment. There's no we, because the people can't unite. The people have no power because the people can't unite, and the system knows it. See, the system is God here. What Christians think God is, that's what this system is here. The money and the system of things is the God here. And that's all powerful. It knows that the people can't come together and bring it to heal. It's not possible. It cannot happen here. It has never happened. It will never happen. Again, we must always solve for and reconcile at the level of Kaczynski. See? So even I lapse into this we level problem solving. Even in a thought experiment, I can't go there. Why? Because it's untrue and it rings hollow and it has no life or substance. Why? Let the dead bury the dead, render unto Caesar. See? That's the true meaning. It's a violation for what I am to even speak that way. See? It's a violation. What you gonna tell me? What you gonna tell me? 14 people in the house listening live. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the generous donos of the past. Much appreciated. Don't really need them right now. Probably gonna need them again at some point in the future. So, hey, the audience has always been there for me. But again, kudos and congratulations for being, in Alphabet, Google, YouTube's hell pit. And I don't believe in shadow banning. That's never made sense to me. YouTube ain't never going to push this out. Y'all more or less word of mouthed your way here. Y'all more or less found your way here through what? Something in the evolution of your own consciousness and your own spirit. And you don't need, look, the fact that Benton even needs to speak this on some level, So, but hey, people need encouragement, That's to your credit. And Replay Crew, same thing. Now, we have some hate watchers, and that's fine. Because that's called the seeds. See, the parable of the sower, right? That might be that middle ground where some of those seeds could sprout. And then some of those sprouts will die from the conditions that they're placed under or that they place themselves under. But then there's that potential, see? And some of it's just the rocky ground, and that's the humiliation side of things. They like that they are lovers of death, and they like to listen to somebody like me who rubs their noses in it. And that's the people who are most obsessed with imagine what it smells like in Benton's big rig, or his feet ain't washed, right? Or look at his hygiene. That's the people who like to come and listen to be humiliated and have their noses rubbed in what they're doing and what they're performing. Because those are the lovers of death. And they love humiliation, see. Sickos. There's some sickos around, whatever. Pay them no mind. There's always been sickos and creeps. And they're really good at passing themselves off as not sickos and creeps. And then next thing I know, I'm visiting with one of them in their own abode, and I'm wondering, why are they bending over and sticking their ass in my face and putting their ass up in the air? Maybe, I don't know, maybe every once in a while somebody gives them what they want. Humiliation, right? Because symbolically, it's like, well, I'm not into this, but, even if I was, the symbolism's not lost on me, right? I've been long retired from that particular so-called pleasure of the flesh, which it's repugnant. It's repugnant. And so it's not about discipline and repression and avoiding the pleasures of the flesh. It's to bootstrap internally mind, body, and spirit so that that's no longer pleasure. See, that's the point, folks. And it's only ever achievable by tapping into the internal space of the individual if the individual is what I am. Now, I suspect that some of these folks are so cut off from what may have been there at some point, whether it's through families, bloodlines, whatever they went through as children, demons, oppression, they're so cut off, right, that they can't ever get back home. Because if they can get back home, Dahmer can get back home. So are you willing to accept that Dahmer was born spiritually perfected and there's still a path to him getting back to that? I'm not willing to go there. That doesn't, to me, that involves so much so-called blasphemy in the Holy Spirit, which is supposedly the only unforgivable sin. I don't think Dahmer, if that was real, I don't think he can get back there. And what was Dahmer's apartment complex? Because I don't know how much y'all have looked into Dahmer, but number one, there's no way that entire building didn't smell like death. So now we're into lovers who lived there, lovers of death, or maybe people whose noses didn't work. And then Dahmer used to have cookouts out back. Because remember, when people do their dirt, they go hide. They don't do it on Front Street. And again, who knows? I'm talking official fiction. I don't know what happened. But Dahmer was out back feeding the community. And who was the community? Lovers of death in Milwaukee. Some version of Sweeney Todd. Soylent Green is people. Boy, howdy, this is a wicked world. So it's a violation, and it's repugnant, the idea that the Lord Christ Jesus, supreme authority, the source of all life, unmarrable, can't be ever brought down one iota, the quickening spirit that can always vibrate ever quicker, would ever be capable of sacrificing itself for such levels of repugnance. Because those levels of repugnance, depravity, death, decay, and destruction are not redeemable, no matter how powerful the so-called sacrifice. And what I am can't ever be connected to that unless I'm willing to violate my own blessing and freely choose to identify as if that could ever be what I am. Nope. Impossible. That's your blasphemy in the Holy Spirit. The only way out is through by subjecting oneself repeatedly, time after time after time after time, to such things that are so gross and repugnant and stomach churning and vomit inducing as to eventually begin to identify with it and then enjoy it on some level. The idea that the Lord Christ Jesus, the representation of the Son of Man in the flesh, who every moment of his life, now it's here, now it's gone, only ever properly identified within himself, Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk style, would ever choose or would even be capable of dying for what Jeffrey Dahmer was doing out behind the apartment building with the lovers of death. Because remember, folks, based on the dogma and doctrine of the Bible, if you pin them down, they'll admit, oh yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer too. Well, he apparently found Christ in prison, so I guess, do the Christians really think they're going to heaven after this and they're going to hang out with Dahmer? Are you crazy? That's where the check boxes lead. This idea that, we have a Christian religion and you can check these boxes. The end stage of that is the person who checked the boxes is in a realm with Jeffrey Dahmer and lovers of death who knew enough to at least check the boxes before they shuffled off of this mortal coil. So is the Christian religion a way to so-called heaven, or is it to deliver oneself into the pits of hell? You tell me. And if that ain't proper preaching, I don't know what is. Bye.